Okay. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm Adam Grove. I'm Karen's husband and Kivalina's dad. I'm going to talk about her in a little bit. And I'm a naturopathic physician in private practice in Anchorage. And focus of my practice is brain and the nervous system. And music is such a key piece of this that I wanted to talk about this a little bit. Now, I'm not going to do most of the talking, which is unusual for the people who know me. I'm actually, we're going to play some videos of some other people talking about this subject. And as you can see in the background, Karen and I are not in the same place. I'm up in our cabin in Talkeetna. And just thinking about this presentation today, I woke up this morning and all I hear is birdsong. And we're going to hear a little bit about the importance of birdsong. And what strikes me is not just the beautiful woods up here, but what I don't have up here, which is noise, right? It's like background noise. And it's interesting because from the clinical perspective, I've been looking at this for a number of years because we know that sound has a huge effect on the brain. And there are interesting studies that show increased industrial noise leading to increased rates of cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, angina, and high blood pressure. And those are independent of things like increased cholesterol levels. So there's something else going on. And what's going on is that sound is impacting the brain. And so we can have nice sound and we can have awful sound. And as musicians, or as parents of musicians, and as a teacher, we can tell the difference between good sound and bad sound, right? And not just a jackhammer sound, but something that's just a little off. And our brain notes that too, and it starts to have a huge cascading effect in our body and our nervous system. So one of the things that they've found is that children who live near airports have increased rates of ADHD, decreased focus, and also poorer reading scores in general. There's also a somewhat problematic factor there too, is that in general, people who live near airports are probably lower on the socioeconomic ladder as well, right? They tend to be poorer. And so, but why couldn't we use music? Because we know music increases children's ability to focus, attend, read, do math, and be successful. What if we took those children that were at higher risk and actually gave them music education, right? We could overcome that effect. So sound works both ways. It can be a positive and it can be a negative, and it's all because of its effect on our nervous system. So that's what I want to have people talk about a little bit today, because noise pollution is such a huge factor. There is probably, I think there was an article in National Geographic a couple months ago about this, it is almost impossible to find a quiet place on the planet. You can't even find a quiet place in the depths of the ocean. You can't find a quiet place up in the air either. Space is probably pretty quiet, right? But so it's very, very interesting. And you know, I grew up listening to music all the time. My parents were avid classical music fans. We never had the money to have music lessons. And I always dreamed of actually being married to somebody who could play music. And when I met Karen, she was smart and she was funny, and she was going to school on a viola performance scholarship. It's like, how perfect could this possibly be, right? It was astounding. And as I hung out more and more with her, and she became probably the only person I hung out with for many years in university, is I just really started to appreciate music and the effect it not only had on me, which I knew, but the effect it had on her and how it changed things. And to actually go and listen to her play in a concert was astounding. And probably even to this day, people think I'm asleep at concerts because I close my eyes. But I am not alone in this, is you can process sound so much more effectively if you're not also processing vision or touch, right? So closing my eyes and listening to music, I have an incredible internal experience of the music. Its sounds and its memories, it's just incredibly vivid. And I don't think everybody is necessarily that way. There are some people who apparently don't sense music in that way, but most of us do. And then after my daughter was born, our daughter was born, and Karen started teaching Suzuki. It's like it really clicked. Dr. Suzuki was really onto something. And as he always said, he wasn't about making great musicians, he was about making great people. Because music was the tool to shape our nervous systems and to create these amazing things. And yes, our children end up being great musicians, but they're also great people. And not to say you can't be a great person without music, but it's an important, very important tool. And then recently, Karen has started teaching Suzuki early childhood education because through his career, Suzuki kept going further and further into the younger years. And toward the end of his life was basically saying we need to start teaching, exposing fetuses to music, right, before birth, right? So in this SEC class and with the pandemic, I've been recruited to be Karen's helper. And we're working with children basically from birth till 3 or maybe a little older. And it is phenomenal to see from week to week what happens in those brains exposed to music and good sound, right? This is why Karen doesn't let me sing. Because you need good tone, you need good instruments, it matters. So the goal today is to let you listen to one particular presentation, and then we'll have a couple short ones after that, about people who really understand this, and to give you perspective. As a parent, sometimes you're struggling with the child who doesn't want to practice, and it's a lot, right? I sat through so many hours of piano lessons, trying to stay awake, trying to keep notes, right? It's like, and to keep perspective on why this matters, right? It really is important. And also not just now and for your child, but for us as human beings, right? So a lot of my practice now is working with people with brain injury and things like age-related cognitive decline or dementia, like Alzheimer's. And music is such an important tool for that as well. So we want to think about that throughout the life span of the human beings. So Karen's going to share these videos for us, but I also put them in the chat. So if for some reason you want to come back, and click on those at some point. There's one that I'm not showing today. I really, really wanted to show it. It's done by James Rhodes, who is a pianist from the UK, an amazing person, but he uses a lot of really strong language that I thought might be offensive to somebody. But if you've got a little bit of time, listening to the link there for his presentation on the inner self in music is amazing, right? And he talks about the difference between Mozart and Lexapro, right, an antidepressant, and how they affect the music system, and the ability to use music in a therapeutic way is phenomenal. So, and Karen, I don't know if you saw, Erica was asking if you could put the things back in the chat. Are they not in the chat anymore? Did they vanish? So, okay, let's start with the very first one. And are you hearing the sound? I'm not hearing the sound on this end. I don't know if there's an issue. It's hard when you start sharing videos. This was working before.
I can't be muted is what it is. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
I sit here down by your graveside and rest for a while neath the warm summer sun. I've been walking all day and I'm nearly done. I can see by your gravestone you were only 19 when you joined the glorious fallen in 1916. But I hope you died quick and I hope you died clean. Oh, Willie McBride, was it slow and obscene? Now, why is it I can remember the lyrics to so many songs, but I can remember almost no poetry? This music resonates strongly with me, not just because it was written by my cousin Eric Bogle, but because music has an extraordinary capacity to evoke memories, to allow us to remember things that have happened in the past. I'm a neuroscientist and a musician, and I've long been fascinated by the impact that music has on us. It has an extraordinary power to stimulate our emotions and stimulate our memories. I guess music's been a stimulant of choice for me because I always feel so much better and energetic and energized when I sing a song or play in a band. And those of you out there who've sung in choirs or play a musical instrument, I'm sure can identify with that feeling. You get a kind of rewarding, even addictive response. It is just amazing. And when you hear music that you like, you want to move. You want to maybe get up and dance.
Oops, sorry.
Or tap your feet or your fingers. Music also affects us at the biological level. Internally, it can affect blood pressure, heart rate, hormones. Externally, it can affect us, give us goosebumps or spine-tingling chills, or, as with Eric's music, can drive us to tears. Now, as far as we know, all groups of people around the world make, appreciate, and respond to music. It is a universal human skill. Thanks to archaeological evidence and genetic studies, we can guess that our ancestors first began to leave Africa and colonize the rest of the planet between about 65,000 and 75,000 years ago. And they all carried with them the power of language and the power of music. In fact, the earliest musical instruments that we know of, such as this bone flute here, are at least 40,000 years old. Now, it is generally agreed that the evolution of the modern mind is closely linked to the evolution of language. Language is the means by which we learn and pass on information, ideas, skills, plans within and across generations. But if language was the primary partner of our newly evolved cognitive power, why do we have music? As a colleague of mine, Ian Cross, once wrote, music neither ploughs, sows, weaves, nor feeds, so why on earth do we have music as a universal? Now, a number of ideas have been put forward to try and explain this universality from our very evolutionary beginnings through to the present day. Darwin, for example, thought that music and dance were to do with sex, fitness, finding a mate. Others believe that music is important when mothers are communicating with their young infants in the first few months of life before babies learn to use language and to talk. When we look at the areas in the brain that are active when we process language or music, there are some areas of overlap, which suggests to many that perhaps language and music evolved from a common precursor. We can call this a musi-language or a proto-language. But there are also clear differences. So in most people, language is processed on the left side of the brain, in the left hemisphere, whereas music has a more right hemisphere bias. Music also activates pathways within a complex structure called the limbic system. The limbic system is buried beneath the surface of the brain, is involved in learning and memory, and also our emotional responses. Music also activates a reward center buried deep in our brain, a reward center that is also stimulated by other pleasurable activities like eating chocolate or having sex, not necessarily in that order. But music does more than just making you feel good. Music also activates regions in the front part of the cortex that are also activated when you perform cooperative altruistic acts. These are acts where you put somebody else's welfare in front of your own, sometimes at a risk or cost to yourself. It's sort of, I'll scratch your back if one day you'll scratch mine. What I want to do now is to show you the power of music, showing how music can change the way we view the world. What I'm showing you here is a picture in silence so that you can get a feel for this visual image. Just watch. Now, I'm going to ask these wonderful members of the Perth Symphony Orchestra to play a piece of music, see how you feel about it this time. Lovely. Now, watch it again, but with this accompaniment. It was quite pretty the second time round, wasn't it? No wonder music is so important in the movies. Now, science and technology has given us things like magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, which has given us a huge new way of looking at the way music is processed in our brains. Unfortunately, I couldn't get an MRI on the stage with me here today. So we're going to use another method to look live at how the brain is affected by music, and this is using electroencephalography, or EEG. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, fellow neuroscientist and musician, Andrew Price. You can see he's got an interesting cap on his head. This is full of electrodes that are designed to pick up electrical activity that's going on inside his brain from different regions. So essentially what we have here is a window looking at the electrical signals that's zapping around inside his head. What we're going to do is to see how his brainwave activity changes as different sorts of music are being played. So first of all, we're going to ask Andrew to close his eyes so that the visual stimulus is removed and he can focus more on what he's listening to. And now we're going to play different sorts of music to see how that impacts upon him. These are alpha waves, synchronized activity. He is at peace. He loves this peace. It's really calming. He loves it. Well, I don't know, there was a change there for sure. The other thing is, when you listen to a piece of music that you expect, part of the fun is expecting something to happen. What happens when the unexpected happens? Well, I mean, you know, did anyone not get that? I should add that that was written into the score just so that their reputation is intact. But what you could see there is how that expectation was broken, and Andrew's brainwaves, just because he knows the piece, he's a musician, he's got a good ear, they went AWOL. There are certain things we can't show you about the effect of music using that sort of technology. So we can't show you how music that you like affects the chemical transmitters in your brain or your hormones, even the impact that music can have on your immune system. For example, when you are listening to a piece that you're familiar with, there's often an emotional peak in that music, and you're expecting it, you're anticipating it. A group in Montreal showed that during that anticipation phase, when you're expecting this emotional peak, there is a release of this neurotransmitter called dopamine in a certain part of the brain. When the emotional peak arrives, you can call it, if you like, the musical climax, there's a sudden burst of dopamine in another part of the brain that is associated with the reward areas. Now, interestingly, dopamine is also involved in other pathways, which include process information about motivation, attention, movement, and addiction. When imaging the brain, areas that are active when you perform a social task, one that requires empathy and understanding somebody else's feelings, those areas are the same as those that are activated when you listen to pleasurable music, music that you like. Now, what is particularly interesting is that the levels of a hormone called oxytocin in the bloodstream are raised when people are singing together, but particularly when singers are improvising together. Now, I find that interesting because oxytocin is a hormone that's well known to be associated with empathy, trust, and relationship building. Our sensitivity to pain is also decreased when we're involved in group music making activities, as are levels of the stress hormone cortisol. So music is a social glue that clearly enhances our sense of mental well-being. Now, the more we study the neuroscience of music, the more we understand how and why music and language evolved alongside each other, but it also helps us to understand the continued importance of music in the 21st century. So we now know, for example, that music can help unlock memories in people with dementia, for example, people with Alzheimer's disease. We also know that music can be used in the treatment of certain developmental disorders, such as autism. We also know that it can be used in rehabilitation therapies to improve mood and motor performance in patients who've suffered a stroke or have had a brain injury or in conditions like Parkinson's disease. Music is an effective therapy that clearly should be widely used within the medical community. But it is perhaps in the field of education that the power of music is most important. More and more research is showing us that at least some musical education has a positive impact on social and cognitive development of children. And these effects are long-lasting: better hearing, better motor skills, improved memory, which incidentally appears to go on all the way through into old age, better verbal and literacy skills, even some suggest better skills at mathematics. When involved in community or social music making, there's a very positive impact on the way children interact at the social level, including children that come from very, very different cultural backgrounds. How important is that these days? And yet, music is disappearing from the curriculum in most parts of the Western world. It seems that music is thought of as an art. It's separate from science, and it's quarantined from the 24/7 economic and work issues that dominate our existence. But it wasn't always that way, and it is certainly not that way in Indigenous populations that are still with us today. Right up until the Middle Ages, music was a normal part of education. It was taught alongside arithmetic, mathematics, astronomy, geometry. If you had a time machine and you could go back and ask Leonardo da Vinci whether he was a scientist or an artist, he wouldn't have understood that question, because in those days they weren't thought of as separate entities. They were all part of what we know of as natural philosophy. Now, of course, language is a key element, an important part of human evolution and human communication. But it is essentially an individualizer, because we take turns when we talk. One person talks, another person listens, and hopefully vice versa if it's a constructive relationship. To balance this out, we have music, what I've called the harmonizer. Music binds us in a way that language rarely does. It is a social communication system that for tens of thousands of years has helped us come together and to work together. When we make music, at least for me, the world seems like a far better place. We forget our individual fears, concerns, worries. I am convinced that what we choose to do with this knowledge, with this power of music, can help drive us towards a more cooperative society and a far more connected world. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think that Alan Harvey's take on this from the neuroscience perspective is really interesting, and I wanted to see if anybody had any comments or questions. But just before we do that, just to highlight a few things, I noticed, Karen certainly smiled when the symphony players were playing along and they would hit the wrong note, right? And you could see what happened to the brain waves. There's a reason why music is the way it is, right? And it's somewhat cultural, I think, in terms of what meter we prefer, how music unfolds. But there's good sound and there's bad sound, right? And you could see what happened to that guy's brainwaves when that changed. So, and it's also interesting that music is so profoundly impactful in the limbic system, which is that deep part of our brain that processes threats and information from the outside world. And it's a very fast part of our brain. It's faster than thought itself, right? And that's so when you touch a hot stove, you don't have to think about it. You just jerk your hand away, right? It's designed to keep us safe. And so that's where music plays such an important role, because it can help us moderate our moods, our attention focus, impulsivity, all of that so much more quickly than thought, right? You can go to a therapist and you can come up with mantras you put in your head or ways of thinking about things, and yet you walk out of the building and you have PTSD and a car backfires, and next thing you know, you're on the ground even before you get a chance to think about it or implement the things the therapist just told you, right? So music is an ability to get into that space. And it's very powerful, as he mentions, in terms of empathy. And I really like the idea that he looks at it as music as a harmonizer. And certainly in these crazy days, it seems like we could certainly use a lot more harmonizing. So I want to see if anybody had any questions or thoughts, and then we've got a couple more much shorter little videos to watch to kind of put a different perspective on this. Well, one thing that, and you can see videos of this, there were so many things to show, and we have so little time, really. But those of you who remember Patty Gifford, she was a congressman and she was shot in the head. So her recovery has been documented over the years. And as a clinician working in brain injury, it's been fascinating watching this, because it's nice to find high-profile people who are suffering from the things that a lot of people without the high profile suffer from, and it shines light on those issues. So there's a video clip, and it's on YouTube, of her trying to learn to speak again. And she's having trouble with the word, I think it's shine or light, one of those little words, and she can't say it. The speech therapist is working with her, and it's not working. And so the speech therapist starts singing, Shine That Little Light of Mine. And Patty joins in, and she can say it perfectly. It's perfectly clear, perfect enunciation, because they tapped into that music, right? It's a different part of your brain, and we didn't see it in this, but there's many other videos that show what happens in an MRI when you play music, and it isn't just the right side of our brain or the left side of our brain. All aspects of our brain light up with music, and it's different if you're a performer, like you play that instrument, or you're just an audience member, in terms of how your brain lights up. But even for Patty Gifford, who knew that song, and when she would sing it, she could say the words. When she just tried to say the words without the musical context, nothing came out, right? So it's an amazing tool. So this next video is by a guy who basically designs music soundscapes. So he's going to talk about the reasons why sound matters and how it affects us. So Karen, if you could just run that little video, please.
Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Medicine works in a
We're still in an ad, so you're fine.
Yeah, okay.
poor body.
Can you make it full screen?
Once it gets out of the ad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, see, when I click on it, it does that. Sorry.
Okay. Perfect. So we're forced to watch the ad, which again is actually very interesting because if you think about ads without music are very rare. And there's a reason for that. And actually this next presentation will talk about that because this is kind of what his business is helping create the right kind of sound. So good sound versus bad sound. I don't know what this ad is for, but it has some very interesting imagery. And, you know, again, like sound is processed in a way that vision is processed very differently. And our brain is very much devoted to vision. We have a portion of our brain as human beings that is devoted to vision. And yet it doesn't have that same very deep influence on our limbic system that vision does. It's interesting. Auditory processing is one of the very first senses to develop in a child, right, in a fetus.
Okay. Hold on one sec. I don't know what went wrong with that one. I'm going to try it. Oop, I'm going to kill it and try it again. Okay. Okay. Apologies.
Medicine works.
This
And I
is
just
like,
see dark right now.
yeah, I don't know if there's a way to skip it. I'm
It's as
sorry.
effective in 90210 as it is in 86503. Medicine will not discriminate against the color of your skin.
So go ahead and talk. I'm going to mute it.
Okay. So it's so again, I think if we think about music as sound, right? I mean, it's basically music is a collection of sounds, sounds that work together, right? That create those uniform brainwaves, don't create that dissonance. For different people, different sounds are pleasing, right? And there's some interesting studies that show that playing music that people like increases things like attention, focus, and ability to perform certain cognitive tasks. And yet exposure to music they don't like decreases their ability to perform. And so even though classical music is kind of the, I guess, the touchstone for this, there are a lot of different types of music, and they work equally well in studies for people. You just need to be listening to music that you like, not music you don't like, right? So, and they even found that if reading a story, like a Stephen King story, if you like the story, that had equally pronounced effects on people's ability to perform. So it's not just that music.
Okay, here goes.
I'm not quite sure whether
All right, still black on my end
snare drum at 9.
for some reason. I know this video sharing is complicated. And it's black again, still. Let me see what happens if I try sharing it from my end. I know it didn't always work before.
Yeah, it's got so many issues. You'll have to go through that ad again. It seems to be unable to skip. So you might want to skip this
Okay,
one.
how about now? Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, here, let's try it from here. Oops. Oh, that was just the end of it. All right.
Don't move. Don't move. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Hi. Okay. Why am I seeing just
8 seconds down there, down in the lower corner. 5 seconds, 4 seconds.
I can't even see anything.
Okay.
Okay, it's going to be the next. That's the next one now. Here we go. There we go. Make it big.
Over the next 5 minutes, my intention is to transform your relationship with sound. Let me start with the observation that most of the sound around us is accidental and much of it is unpleasant. We stand on street corners shouting over noise like this and pretending that it doesn't exist. Well, this habit of suppressing sound has meant that our relationship with sound has become largely unconscious. There are 4 major ways sound is affecting you all the time, and I'd like to raise them in your consciousness today. First is physiological. Sorry about that, I've just given you a shot of cortisol, your fight-flight hormone. Sound's affecting your hormone secretions all the time, but also your breathing, your heart rate, which I just also did, and your brain waves. It's not just unpleasant sounds like that do it. This is surf. It has a frequency of roughly 12 cycles per minute. Most people find that very soothing, and interestingly, 12 cycles per minute is roughly the frequency of the breathing of a sleeping human. So there's a deep resonance with being at rest. We also associate it with being stress-free and on holiday. The second way in which sound affects you is psychological. Music is the most powerful form of sound that we know that affects our emotional state. This is guaranteed to make most of you feel pretty sad if I leave it on. Music is not the only kind of sound, however, which affects your emotions. Natural sound can do that too. Birdsong, for example, is a sound which most people find reassuring. There's a reason for that. Over hundreds of thousands of years, we've learned that when the birds are singing, things are safe. It's when they stop you need to be worried. The third way in which sound affects you is cognitively. You can't understand 2 people talking at once, or in this case, 1 person talking twice.
To the other one.
You have to choose which me you're going to listen to. We have a very small amount of bandwidth for processing auditory input, which is why noise like this is extremely damaging for productivity. If you have to work in an open plan office like this, your productivity is greatly reduced, and whatever number you're thinking of, it probably isn't as bad as this. You are 1/3 as productive in open plan offices as in quiet rooms. And I have a tip for you. If you have to work in spaces like that, carry headphones with you with a soothing sound like birdsong, put them on, and your productivity goes back up to triple what it would be. The fourth way in which sound affects us is behaviorally. With all that other stuff going on, it would be amazing if our behavior didn't change. So ask yourself, is this person ever going to drive at a steady 28 miles per hour? I don't think so. At the simplest, you move away from unpleasant sound and towards pleasant sound. So if I were to play this, for more than a few seconds, you feel uncomfortable. For more than a few minutes, you'd be leaving the room in droves. For people who can't get away from noise like that, it's extremely damaging for their health. And that's not the only thing that bad sound damages. Most retail sound is inappropriate and accidental and even hostile, and it has a dramatic effect on sales. For those of you who are retailers, you may want to look away before I show this slide. They're losing up to 30% of their business with people leaving shops faster or just turning around on the door. We all have done it, and leaving the area because the sound in there is so dreadful. I want to spend just a moment talking about the model that we've developed, which allows us to start at the top and look at the drivers of sound, analyze the soundscape, and then predict the 4 outcomes I've just talked about, or start at the bottom and say what outcomes do we want, and then design a soundscape to have a desired effect. At last, we've got some science we can apply, and we're in the business of designing soundscapes. Just a word on music. Music is the most powerful sound there is, often inappropriately deployed. It's powerful for 2 reasons. You recognize it fast and you associate it very powerfully. I'll give you 2 examples. Most of you recognize that immediately. The younger, maybe not. And most of you associate that with something. Now, those are 1-second samples of music. Music is very powerful, and unfortunately, it's veneering commercial spaces, often inappropriately. I hope that's going to change over the next few years. Let me just talk about brands for a moment, because some of you run brands. Every brand is out there making sound right now. There are 8 expressions of a brand in sound. They're all important, and every brand needs to have guidelines at the center. I'm glad to say that is starting to happen now. You all recognize that one. This is the most played tune in the world today. 1.8 billion times a day, that tune is played, and it costs Nokia absolutely nothing. Just leave you with 4 golden rules for those of you who run businesses for commercial sound. First, make it congruent, pointing in the same direction as your visual communication. That increases impact by over 1,100%. If your sound is pointing in the opposite direction, incongruent, you reduce impact by 86%. That's an order of magnitude up or down. This is important. Secondly, make it appropriate to the situation. Thirdly, make it valuable. Give people something with the sound. Don't just bombard them with stuff. And finally, test it and test it again. Sound is complex. There are many countervailing influences. It can be a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. Sometimes you have to just eat it and see what happens. So I hope this talk has raised sound in your consciousness. If you're listening consciously, you can take control of the sound around you. It's good for your health. It's good for your productivity. If we all do that, we move to a state that I like to think will be sound living in the world. I'm going to leave you with a little bit more birdsong. I recommend at least 5 minutes a day, but there is no maximum dose. Thank you for lending me your ears today.
Okay, so there, from a very different perspective, all right, the use of sound as a way to sell things or convince people of certain behaviors, right? So, and again, very well worth thinking about, because the...
I'm not quite sure whether...
Oops.
I think you need to stop your video.
Drum at 9.
Oh, am I sharing? Oh, sorry.
You're still sharing.
I thought you were sharing. Sorry about that. This is what happens when we keep trading back and forth. So, again, different perspective, but how it has physiological effects, psychological effects, which then end up changing our cognitive aspects and actually our behavior, right? And so that's really also very important to think about with music and sound, and also how we use sound and how we use noise, right? And how that can affect, for example, your child at home, you know, trying to study if there's noise in the background, the use of headphones, and the use of other pleasant sounds. It doesn't always have to be music. And of course, you know, Suzuki's approach to music was that it's like a language. You just hear it over and over and over again. And so there's lots of listening, right? And that listening to basically good sound helps offset, like you saw in that open workspace with all those noises are still there. But if you put headphones on or you're listening to good sound, it helps kind of control all that other input. It's unfortunately still there, so it's not as ideal as a quiet environment, but it's worth thinking about as you're having your child listen to music, that helps with the sound of the car or the siblings arguing or things like that, right? So good sound really does help. So, and I think this next piece, which is going to be the last one, kind of helps pull together music and rhythm and how we are as humans are incredible, right? So I was watching a little video a little while ago about animals responding to rhythm, right? To beat, and humans are fairly unique in this, our ability to respond, right? If you play a certain beat, certain music, humans want to start moving, right? This is where dance comes from, and dance is very, very old, is probably as old as music. And so they were looking for animals that were not related to humans, so not primates. They were looking particularly at cockatiels because they found in one lab they were able to basically develop a cockatiel's ability to respond to sound, and it would kind of like be bopping on its little stick in its cage to the beat. And its favorite, the tone or the range of frequency that it could do its thing with, you know, to match was 115 to 125 hertz, right? So that's probably about twice what the human heart rate is at 60. And so, and when they would move it out of that frequency range, it would kind of lose it, and it couldn't be bopping along to the music, right? So it does seem like there is maybe for each animal, but certainly for us as humans, we kind of like music that resonates with our own body, right? And he mentioned this in the previous video about the 12 cycles per second, which is related to human breathing, right? Human heart rate around 60 on average, right? So it's interesting about how we find music and sound that resonates or is dissonant with our own experience, right? So this next video will kind of bring a bunch of those pieces to the fore.
How to impress a woman? This is a question.
Oh, sorry.
All right, if you have not ever watched the Mozart group, they are a hilarious group of guys, right? And so that really is excellent for pulling this all together, right? It's like to be able to do what the violinist was doing, basically 4 different tasks, actually 5 toward the very end, right? Standing on 1 foot. 3 of those requiring rhythm music, basically, right? It's like, that is amazing. I don't think the cockatiel, even at 115 hertz, is going to be able to do all of that stuff, right? The human brain is really quite amazing. And even when the cellist got up and played the balloon, even though the sound was not always like, it wasn't actually wrong, right? It wasn't quite right, but it was close enough, right, that you could kind of tell where it was going, right? So it is just fascinating. So I just love that as a sort of a final way to bring this all together and to think about the impact that music has and through our brain. So hopefully that provides a little bit of different perspective. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain those. Otherwise, I think we should all go practice playing the violin and using the little paddle, what's that called? Ping pong, right? So yeah, so if your children are ever feel like it's just too much, Mom, I can't do it, it's too hard, show them this video and tell them they've still got a little ways to go, right?
Thank you. I really enjoyed that.
Yes, great. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Learned a lot.
Excellent. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Oops, Karen, you're muted.
I'll send the link for this recording out in an email, and you guys are welcome to share it with anybody that you think would be interested. So thank you so much for coming.
And again, the last link there that we didn't look at today, again because of the strong language, is really quite excellent too, in a much different way of thinking about music. So, all righty, thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice job.
It was good.
Sorry for all the technical difficulties.
Oh, it's so hard. It's like I don't know what the deal is.
Oh, let me stop the recording here.